Okay, coming live. Waiting for YouTube to catch up. There we go. Hello! So today I wanted to take a look at climate change. Like a lot of people, I'm of the opinion that climate change is a real thing and it's a serious issue. But being honest, it's been a long time since I've been in school, and it's been quite a while since I've actually brushed up on the science behind the issue. And maybe someone watching isn't all that convinced, and I don't want to yell at you or anything. I don't think that's going to be productive. But maybe you watch along, maybe you check some stuff out, maybe see some of the evidence for yourself, come to your own conclusions. But I figured we'd start with NASA, probably a pretty reputable source for information. They actually have a whole section on climate change at climate.nasa.gov. So I just pulled up a couple of articles and stuff of causes, and I figured we would just start reading through them. So let's get to it. Where are we looking? Does this have an author that I can thank? No. Okay. Alright, causes, facts, evidence, quite a few. Okay, we'll just start with it. Climate change, how do we know? So here we have a chart detailing atmospheric carbon dioxide. So going back 800,000 years, you see parts per million carbon dioxide levels, and just recently, starting kind of the 90s into the 1950s, we saw a massive spike that's sort of unprecedented for a couple 100,000 for quite a long time. Okay. Earth's climate has changed throughout history. Just in the last 650,000 years, there have been 7 cycles of glacial advance and retreat, with the abrupt end of the last ice age about 11,700 years ago, marking the beginning of the modern climate era and of human civilization. Most of these climate changes are attributed to small variations in Earth's orbit that change the amount of solar energy our planet receives. So the last ice age, with the abrupt end of the last ice age about 11,000 years ago, or so about 12,000 years ago. So roughly 12,000 years ago the last ice age ended. The current warming trend is of particular significance because most of it is extremely likely, greater than 95% probability, to be the result of human activity since the mid-20th century and proceeding at a rate that is unprecedented over millennia. Earth-orbiting satellites and other technological advances have enabled scientists to see the big picture, collecting many different types of information about our planet and its climate on a global scale. This body of data, collected over many years, reveals the signs of a changing climate. The heat-trapping nature of carbon dioxide and other gases was demonstrated in the mid-19th century. Their ability to affect the transfer of infrared energy through the atmosphere is the scientific basis of many instruments flown by NASA. There is no question that increased levels of greenhouse gases must cause Earth to warm in response. Ice cores drawn from Greenland, Antarctica, and tropical mountain glaciers show that Earth's climate responds to changes in greenhouse gas levels. Ancient evidence can also be found in tree rings, ocean sediments, coral reefs, and layers of sedimentary rocks. This ancient or paleoclimate evidence reveals that current warming is occurring roughly 10 times faster than the average rate of ice age recovery warming. Carbon dioxide from human activity is increasing more than 250 times faster than it did from natural sources after the last ice age. The evidence for rapid climate change is compelling. Global temperature rise. The planet's average surface temperature has risen about 2.12 degrees Fahrenheit, 1.18 degrees Celsius since the late 19th century, a change driven largely by increased carbon dioxide emissions into the atmosphere and other human activities. Most of the warming occurred in the last 40 years, with the 7 most recent being the warmest. The years 2016 and 2020 are tied for the warmest year on record. Okay, and they do have sources here that's going to take me to the bottom. Yes, okay. I have to check some of these out then. Earth's baseline global temperature. Let's take a look at this. Last annual average anomaly 2020, 1.02 degrees Celsius. This graph illustrates the change in global surface temperature relative to 1951 and 1980 average temperatures. 19 of the warmest years have occurred since 2000, with the exception of 1998. The year 2020 tied with 2016 for the warmest year on record since record-keeping began in 1880. This research is broadly consistent with similar constructions prepared for the Climatic Research Unit in the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The time series below shows the 5-year average variation of global surface temperatures. Dark blue indicates areas cooler than average. Dark red indicates areas warmer than average. The global temperature figure on the homepage dashboard shows global temperature change since 1880. One gets this number by subtracting the first data point in the chart from the last data point. Makes sense. So taking a look all the way back to 1880, temperature anomaly, so we start seeing increased temperature all the way up from the 1880s and continuing until today, and now we're seeing 1.02 degrees Celsius difference. Anything else on this page? No. Does this... Fascinating. This is probably going to take longer than I want to sit. Oh, okay, so it's getting hotter. Yeah, okay, so yeah, it's the planet is heating up. There's little doubt of that, I think. I suppose that by itself needs explained after that point, but that the Earth is warming up is, like, I think pretty straightforwardly the case. Global climate change causes, an overview of the greenhouse effect and other contributors to abrupt climate change. Scientists attribute the global warming trend observed since the mid-20th century to the human expansion of the greenhouse effect, warming that results when the atmosphere traps heat radiating from Earth toward space. Certain gases in the atmosphere block heat from escaping. Long-lived gases that remain semi-permanently in the atmosphere and do not respond physically or chemically to changes in temperature are described as forcing climate change. Gases such as water vapor, which respond physically to or chemically to changes in temperature, are seen as feedbacks. Gases that contribute to the greenhouse effect include nitrous oxide, water vapor, methane, and carbon dioxide. Water vapor, the most abundant greenhouse gas, but importantly, it acts as a feedback to the climate. Water vapor increases as the Earth's atmosphere warms, but so does the possibility of clouds and precipitation, making these some of the most important feedback mechanisms to the greenhouse effect. Carbon dioxide, a minor but very important component of the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide is released through natural processes such as respiration and volcano eruptions, and through human activity such as deforestation, land use changes, and burning fossil fuels. Humans have increased atmospheric CO2 concentration by 47% since the Industrial Revolution began. This is the most important long-lived forcing of climate change. Methane, a hydrocarbon gas produced both through natural sources and human activities, including the decomposition of wastes in landfills, agriculture, and especially rice cultivation, as well as ruminant digestion and manure management associated with domestic livestock. On a molecule-for-molecule basis, methane is a far more active greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, but also one which is much less abundant in the atmosphere. Our water break. Nitrous oxide, a powerful greenhouse gas produced by soil cultivation practices, especially the use of commercial and organic fertilizers, fossil fuel combustion, nitric acid production, and biomass burning. Chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, synthetic compounds entirely of industrial origin, used in a number of applications, but now largely regulated in production and release to the atmosphere by international agreement for their ability to contribute to the destruction of the ozone layer. They are also greenhouse gases. On Earth, human activities are changing the natural greenhouse. Over the last century, the burning of fossil fuels like coal and oil has increased the concentration of atmospheric carbon dioxide, CO2. This happens because the coal or oil burning process combines carbon with oxygen in the air to make CO2. To a lesser extent, the clearing of land for agriculture, industry, and other human activities has increased concentration of greenhouse gases. The consequences of changing the natural atmospheric greenhouse are difficult to predict, but some effects seem likely. On average, Earth will become warmer. Some regions may welcome warmer temperatures, but others may not. Warmer conditions will probably lead to more evaporation and precipitation overall, but individual regions will vary, some becoming wetter and others drier. A stronger greenhouse effect will warm the ocean and partially melt glaciers and ice sheets, increasing sea level. Ocean water will also expand if it warms, contributing further to sea level rise. Outside of a greenhouse, higher atmospheric carbon dioxide levels can have both positive and negative effects on crop yields. Some laboratory experiments suggest that elevated CO2 levels can increase plant growth. However, other factors such as changing temperatures, ozone, and water and nutrient constraints may more than counteract any potential increase in yield. If optimal temperature ranges for some crops are exceeded, earlier possible gains in yield may be reduced or reversed altogether. Climate extremes such as droughts, floods, and extreme temperatures can lead to crop losses and threaten the livelihoods of agricultural producers and the food securities of communities worldwide. Depending on the crop and ecosystem, weeds, pests, and fungi can also thrive under warmer temperatures, wetter climates, and increased CO2 levels, and climate change will likely increase weeds and pests. Finally, although rising CO2 can stimulate net plant growth, research has shown that it can also reduce the nutritional value of most food crops by reducing the concentrations of protein and essential minerals in most plant species. Climate change can cause new patterns of pests and diseases to emerge, affecting plants, animals, and humans, imposing new risks for food security, food safety, and human health. The role of human activity. In its fifth assessment report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, a group of 1,300 independent scientific experts from countries all over the world under the auspices of the United Nations, concluded there's a more than 95% probability that human activities over the past 50 years have warmed our planet. The industrial activities that our modern civilization depends on have raised atmospheric carbon dioxide levels from 280 parts per million to 414 parts per million in the last 150 years. The panel also concluded there's a better than 95% probability that human-based greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide have caused much of the observed increases in Earth's temperatures over the past 50 years. Temperature versus solar activity. So on the left we have solar irradiance, something per meter squared. Is that, I'm not sure what the, maybe watts? Not sure. The above graph compares global surface temperature changes, red line, and the sun's energy that Earth receives, yellow line, in watts, units of energy per square meter since 1880. The lighter, thinner lines show the yearly levels, while the heavier, thicker lines show the 11-year average trends. 11-year averages are used to reduce the year-to-year natural noise in the data, making the underlying trends more obvious. Okay. So the solar irradiance, so the amount of sunlight that we're receiving from the sun is remaining relatively steady as the years go by. Overall, between 1880 and 2020, it's not hugely different, bit of a spike in the 40s and 60s. Nevertheless, the temperature is increasing. I think that's what this is saying, is that even though the total amount of energy we're receiving from the sun has remained the same, our temperature is rising disproportionately. The amount of solar energy that Earth receives has followed the sun's natural 11-year cycle of small ups and downs with no net increase since the 1950s. Over the same period, global temperature has risen markedly. It is therefore extremely unlikely that the sun has caused the observed global temperature warming trend over the past half-century. It's reasonable to assume that changes in the sun's energy output would cause the climate to change, since the sun is the fundamental source of energy that drives our climate system. Indeed, studies show that solar variability has played a role in past climate changes. For example, a decrease in solar activity coupled with an increase in volcanic activity is thought to have helped trigger the Little Ice Age between approximately 1650 and 1850, when Greenland cooled from 1410 to the 1720s and glaciers advanced in the Alps. But several lines of evidence show that current global warming cannot be explained by changes in energy from the sun. Since 1750, the average amount of energy coming from the sun either remained constant or increased slightly. If the warming were caused by a more active sun, then scientists would expect to see warmer temperatures in all layers of the atmosphere. Instead, they have observed a cooling in the upper atmosphere and a warming at the surface and in the lower parts of the atmosphere. That's because greenhouse gases are trapping heat in the lower atmosphere. Climate models that include solar irradiance changes can't reproduce the observed temperature trend over the past century or more without including a rise in greenhouse gases. Okay. That's the end of that, I suppose. So it seems like there's a fairly strong correlation between carbon dioxide and raising temperature, which seems to imply causation in that case. Certainly it can't be explained by the warming sun. Can I have another water break? Okay, let's continue. Graphic, global warming, I already saw that. Warming ocean. Let's see, do we have anything that looks like it'd be another good vital signs? Land ice, let's check that out. Ice sheets. Data from NASA's GRACE and GRACE follow-on satellites show that the land ice sheets in both Antarctica upper chart and Greenland lower chart have been losing mass since 2002. The GRACE mission concluded science operations in June 2017. GRACE follow-on began data collection in June 2018 and is now continuing the mass change data record for both ice sheets. This data record includes the latest data processing improvements and is continually updated as more data are collected, with a lag of up to 2 months. So, Antarctica mass, I wonder what that's measured in. So going back to before 2004, continually losing mass, which again makes sense if the Earth is warming. Let's go ahead and move, let's see, already looked at that. So the other article I have is from phys.org, which is 5 Climate Change Science Misconceptions Debunked. I figure phys.org is a fairly reputable site. This is written by Mark Maslin here. So let's go ahead and read through this. Thank you, Mark Maslin. The science of climate change is more than 150 years old, and it is probably the most tested area of modern science. However, the energy industry, political lobbyists, and others have spent the last 30 years sowing doubt about the science where none really exists. The latest estimate is the world's 5 largest publicly owned oil and gas companies spend about $200 million each year on lobbying to control, delay, or block climate-motivated policy. This organized and orchestrated climate change science denial has contributed to the lack of progress in reducing global greenhouse gas emissions, to the point that we are facing a global climate emergency. And when climate change deniers use certain myths, at best fake news and at worst straight lies, to undermine the science of climate change, ordinary people can find it hard to see through the fog. Here are 5 commonly used myths and the real science that debunks them. 1. Climate change is just part of the natural cycle. The climate of the Earth has always changed, but the study of paleoclimatology, or past climates, shows us that the changes in the last 150 years, since the start of the Industrial Revolution, have been exceptional and cannot be natural. Modeling results suggest that future predicted warming could be unprecedented compared to the previous 5 million years. The, quote, natural changes, unquote, argument is supplemented with the story that the Earth's climate is just recovering from the cooler temperatures of the Little Ice Age from 1300 to 1850 AD, and that temperatures today are really the same as the medieval warm period, 900 through 1300 AD. The problem is that both the Little Ice Age and the medieval warming period were not global, but regional changes in climate affecting Northwest Europe, Eastern America, Greenland, and Iceland. A study using 700 climate records showed that, over the last 2,000 years, the only time the climate all around the world has changed at the same time and in the same direction has been in the last 150 years, when over 98% of the surface of the planet has warmed. Fascinating. Can I get a better look at this? I can get a better look at this. So this is going to be delta T, which I think means change over time, if I remember correctly. Progressing, year CE, hemisphere ice sheets. Nope, I can't interpret this. Changes are due to sunspots / galactic cosmic rays. Sunspots, this is another myth. Sunspots are storms on the sun's surface that come with intense magnetic activity and can be accompanied by solar flares. These sunspots do have the power to modify the climate on Earth, but scientists using sensors on satellites have been recording the amount of the sun's energy hitting Earth since 1978, and there's been no upward trend, so they cannot be the cause of global warming. Okay. Galactic cosmic rays, GCRs, are high-energy radiation that originates from outside our solar system and may even be from distant galaxies. It has been suggested that they may help to seed or make clouds. So reduced GRCs hitting the Earth would mean fewer clouds, which would reflect less sunlight back into space and so cause Earth to warm. But there are two problems with this idea. First, the scientific evidence shows that GCRs are not very effective at seeding clouds. And second, over the last 50 years, the amount of GCRs have actually increased, hitting record levels in recent years. If this idea were correct, GCRs should be cooling the Earth, which they aren't. Okay, so that's, I think we've already seen this chart actually. CO2 is a small part of the atmosphere. It can't have a large heating effect. This is an attempt to play a classic common sense card, but is completely wrong. In 1856, American scientist Eunice Newton Foote conducted an experiment with an air pump, 2 glass cylinders, and 4 thermometers. It showed that a cylinder containing carbon dioxide and placed in the sun trapped more heat and stayed warmer longer than a cylinder with normal air. Scientists have repeated these experiments in the laboratory and in the atmosphere, demonstrating again and again the greenhouse effects of carbon dioxide. As for the common sense scale argument that a very small part of something can have much of an effect on it, it only takes 0.1 grams of cyanide to kill an adult, which is about 0.0001% of your body weight. Compare this with carbon dioxide, which currently makes up 0.04% of the atmosphere and is a strong greenhouse gas. Meanwhile, nitrogen makes up 78% of the atmosphere and yet is highly unreactive. Scientists manipulate all data sets to show a warning trend. This is not true and a simplistic device used to attack the credibility of climate scientists. It would require a conspiracy covering thousands of scientists in more than 100 countries to reach the scale required to do this. Scientists do correct and validate data all the time. For example, we have to correct historic temperature records as how they were measured has changed. Between 1856 and 1941, most sea temperatures were measured using seawater hoisted on a deck in a bucket. Even this was not consistent, as there was a shift from wooden to canvas buckets and from sailing ships to steamships, which altered the height of the ship's deck, and these changes in turn altered the amount of cooling caused by evaporation as the bucket was hoisted onto the deck. Since 1941, most measurements have been made at the ship's engine water intake, so there's no cooling from evaporation to account for. We must also take into account that many towns and cities have expanded, and so that meteorological stations that were in rural areas are now in urban areas, which are usually significantly warmer than the surrounding countryside. If we didn't make these changes to the original measurements, then Earth's warming over the last 150 years would have appeared to be even greater than the change that has actually been observed, which is now about 1 degree Celsius of global warming. That one's through NASA. World agreement temperatures are rising. Okay, so from 1880 through 2010. It's fascinating we didn't... I guess maybe no one thought to, but 1880 seems really late for that. I thought we would have started taking measurements like that earlier, but I guess not. Climate models are unreliable and too sensitive to carbon dioxide. This is incorrect and misunderstands how models work. It is a way of downplaying the seriousness of future climate change. There is a huge range of climate models, from those aimed at specific mechanisms such as the understanding of clouds to general circulation models that are used to predict the future climate of our planet. There are over 20 major international centers where teams of some of the smartest people in the world have built and run GCMs containing millions of lines of code representing the very latest understanding of the climate system. These models are continually tested against historic and paleoclimate data, as well as individual climate events such as large volcanic eruptions, to make sure that they can reconstruct the climate, which they do extremely well. No single model should ever be considered correct, as they represent a very complex global climate system, but having so many different models constructed and calibrated independently means that we have confidence when the models agree. Taking the whole range of climate models suggests a doubling of carbon dioxide would warm the planet by 2 degrees Celsius to 4.5 degrees Celsius, with an average of 3.1 degrees Celsius. All the models show a significant amount of warming when extra carbon dioxide is added to the atmosphere. The scale of the predicted warming has remained very similar the last 30 years despite the huge increase in the complexity of the models, showing it is a robust outcome of the science. Oy. By combining all our scientific knowledge of natural, solar, volcanic aerosols and ozones, and human-made greenhouse gases and land use changes, factors warming and cooling the climate shows that 100% of the warming observed over the last 150 years is due to humans. There is no scientific support for the continual denial of climate change. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, set up by the United Nations to openly and transparently summarize the science, provides 6 clear lines of evidence for climate change. As extreme weather becomes more and more common, people are realizing that they do not need scientists to tell them the climate is changing. They are seeing and experiencing it firsthand. Okay, I think I'm going to call it there for right now. Please, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and give a like to the video and go ahead and subscribe to the channel. That really helps me out. I want to take a look at more stuff. If anyone has any sources that they really think I should take a look at, feel free to comment and let me know what you think I should take a look at. On my own end, I'm planning on brushing up, really digging into deeply for the first time statistics on my end to maybe try and help me out a little bit with understanding some of the studies a little better, understanding the methodologies. It seems like it could be helpful for the channel. But thank you so much for joining today, and I hope you have a wonderful night.